how Republicans should handle this. Governor, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Charles. Great to be back on with you.
Thanks. All the candidates unanimous and saying this is not the time for President Obama to nominate a candidate, although it feels like the consensus is he will. How do you see this playing out?
Well, there's no doubt that President Obama is going to make a nomination, and that's his constitutional right and responsibility to do. But it is equally the constitutional right and responsibility of the Senate to reject that nomination based on the president's likely push for someone who is so ideologically to the left that the Senate can justify saying, look, we were elected too, Mr. President, and we were elected to be the check and the balance to your branch of government. And so anybody who says, well, the Senate can't do that, of course they can. Or the Senate shouldn't do that. Of course they should. That's why they were elected. And if they don't do the job to which they were elected, then the Republican Party is finished. Hillary will be the next president, and we will deserve it.
Although Hillary and or Bernie Sanders argue that the GOP will hold up the nominee no matter who. On the stage, there was talk of delay, not based on merit, just based on perhaps the idea, to your point, this notion that it's going to be an ultra-liberal. Is there a litmus test that the GOP could share with the American public saying, hey, the potential nominee and ultimately Supreme Court justice should not or should fulfill these particular issues? Is there a litmus test that we can go by?
Well, given 7 years of President Obama, I'd say that if he nominates them, they're probably not acceptable. Look, this is a guy who's gone after the Second Amendment. He's the most pro-abortion president. In fact, he was the most pro-abortion senator. He even supports partial birth abortion, for heaven's sakes. This is a president who has pushed and advocated for same-sex marriage. He's pushed Obamacare and pushing to force the Little Sisters of the Poor to have contraceptives that are abortifacients. I mean, so just let me ask you, is there any decision this president has made in 7 years that showed a conservative side? Any appointment, any nomination, any speech he's given, any policy he's pushed, anything in 7 years that in any way showed that he was a conciliatory figure. I can't think of one. Not one.
No, you're absolutely right with respect to that. What about the notion that he nominates someone who's already gone through this sort of process, someone like a Loretta Lynch? Would that make it more difficult?
You know, it doesn't matter, because I'm going to go back to my point. This is a president who has never put forth anyone who was a middle-of-the-roader, much less somebody that leaned a little to the right. And we're talking about replacing somebody who was the conservative voice. And let me be careful about saying conservative voice. Justice Scalia was more than that. He was a constitutional voice. He truly believed in that the text of the Constitution was what mattered and that words matter. He was not one of these people who believe in the living Constitution so that it means whatever we now say it means, that we can continue to change. The Constitution to Scalia was the tuning fork, and we had to adjust our laws to the standard, to the scale, to the tuning fork. You don't measure the tuning fork to the instrument, you measure the instrument to the tuning fork. And if you have someone who thinks that the Constitution should be adjusted, changed, revised, revisited because culture has changed, that person is not a constitutionalist, not a proper replacement for Scalia, and the Republicans ought to dig in their heels and absolutely say, there is no way, there's a greater chance of a snowball fight in you-know-where than there is that President Obama is going to get a Supreme Court appointment.
Governor, having said that, who do you think this helps the most right now, the candidates that remain in the GOP race for the White House, the untimely and unfortunate death of Justice Scalia?
Well, I'm not sure that it matters a whole lot, since all the candidates seem to be in unanimous consent that the next president, of course they're hoping it's one of them, will be the one to make the appointment. One of the things that I think that would be helpful is if some of the candidates would come out and say, look, here are some people that might be the kind of acceptable people I would appoint. Now, the moment they say it, that person's probably never going to be able to be considered. But I do think that it's an issue for those of us who follow politics closely, those of us who understand the impact of the Supreme Court. But let me tell you, this election is not going to be decided because the president has the power to appoint Supreme Court justices. We'll talk about it, but I'll tell you what it'll be driven by. If you saw those folks on the factory floor at the carrier company in Indianapolis the other day when they were told their jobs are going to Mexico, those are the people, and that sentiment that you saw in that room is what's going to drive this election. And anyone who thinks that that will be somehow eclipsed by a Supreme Court nominee has not been out there on the campaign trail as I have.
Yeah, 1,400 jobs to Mexico. I showed it on my show Friday. We'll talk about it again tonight. I'm glad you brought it up, too. That is the crux of what's going on in this country. Governor Huckabee, we miss you. Thanks for coming on, buddy.
Hey, thanks, Charles. Good to talk to you.
See you soon.